The years between 1500 and 1200 BC are often cited as some of the most prosperous that the world had ever seen. The eastern Mediterranean world, inhabited by the Egyptians, the Hittites and the Minoans, as well as numerous smaller states around them, was a truly cosmopolitan system, rarely seen in world history. Greek and Hittite trade goods regularly show up in archaeological sites in Egypt, whereas Egyptian hieroglyphs and trade goods are often found in places such as the island of Crete and Mycenaean Greece. Just as an example of the multiculturalism of this period, one shipwreck off the coast of Turkey carried goods from 9 different states aboard. As evidenced by substantial diplomatic communications as well as trade, the world of the Late Bronze Age was a vast interconnected system, the culmination of an unbroken cultural line which had existed since the first cities 3,000 years before. Little did the inhabitants of these lands know, however, that from around 1200 BC, their world would catastrophically and violently fall apart in a decades-long cataclysm known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. Significant archaeological evidence relates that a huge number of cities and settlements were violently destroyed during the period 1210 to 1130 BC. In Asia Minor, the mighty Hittite Empire collapsed. In Greece and the Mediterranean, the kingdoms and city-states of the Mycenaean Greeks and the Minoans similarly fell apart. In Canaan and Syria, vast and ancient city-states were razed, with half-written SOS messages written in cuneiform, left to be discovered thousands of years later, many of them still in the kilns that they were fired in. In scenes reminiscent of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, vast numbers of people throughout the eastern Mediterranean fled from their settlements by the shore to take refuge on fortified hilltops. Just one of the great civilizations of the Late Bronze Age survived the collapse and told the tale of what happened. Egypt, led by the pharaoh Ramesses III, often regarded as the last of the great Egyptian pharaohs, and certainly the last New Kingdom ruler to wield any substantial authority. Inscriptions written during his reign tell of a vast coalition of warlike peoples who descended upon the civilized world, destroying it entirely and leaving just Egypt alone to stand against the coming enemy. These enemies are known today as the Sea Peoples, and they remain one of the greatest enigmas of history. Ramesses III was likely born in around 1217 BC as the son of the pharaoh Setnakati, the first of the 20th dynasty, and a ruler who may have usurped the throne from his predecessor. Nonetheless, as evidenced by his name, the father obviously had some connection with the Ramesside royal family. When Ramesses came to the throne in 1186 BC, Egypt had already suffered attacks from the sea and witnessed her neighbouring states begin to fall into political chaos around her. Nevertheless, Ramesses began his reign just like any other pharaoh, completing temples and expanding palace complexes. He also, however, tellingly moved his capital north to be closer to the Mediterranean, probably to thwart any potential invasion from the sea. The world of the Late Bronze Age was a linked-up financial system during this time, and inevitably in such a system, the collapse or instability in one area affects the others. If pushed hard enough, the entire system can collapse in a domino-like effect. This is what had started to happen throughout Egypt's former trade partners by the time Ramesses came to the throne. Many of the archaeological sites from this period that were abandoned were never rebuilt, suggesting a huge event, and an unprecedented one in history up until this point. Just as an example, the chaos in Greece was so bad in the aftermath of the collapse that writing was forgotten for hundreds of years. The conditions that caused the Late Bronze Age collapse have been hotly debated by historians for decades, and there are several possible explanations, of which a combination is probably most likely. The period between 1225 to 1175 BC has been discovered to have been a period of intense seismological activity, so much so that some areas saw continuous and devastating earthquakes that struck the same places again and again throughout the period. The years between 1200 and 800 BC were also notably drier than previous periods, which could easily have precipitated drought and famine within the already delicate societal system of the Late Bronze Age. For the Egyptians themselves, however, the obvious culprits of the chaos were the ones that they could very visibly witness. A vast coalition of seafaring peoples who attacked them by land and by sea in 1207 but were fought off with great difficulty. In 1177, just a handful of years into Ramesses' reign, they attacked again. An inscription from that year reads as follows: "The foreign countries made a conspiracy on their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in their fray. No land could stand against their arms. They were coming forward toward Egypt, while the flame was prepared before them. Their confederation was the Peliset, Djeka, Shelakesh, Danuana and Rashesh. Lands united, they laid their hands on the land as far as the circuit of the earth, their hearts confident and trusting. All in all, a total of 9 nations are named in the Egyptian sources, which suggest a vast coalition of warlike raiders from foreign lands. By this stage, the Hittite capital Hattusha had already fallen, and so had most of the cities of the former trade partners of the Egyptians, who most likely witnessed the very last stages of the invasions by the time they got to Egypt, because of its geographical isolation. They had very likely already incorporated elements of conquered peoples amongst their ranks. Some scholars have even argued that the invasion of the Sea Peoples may have actually been a peasants' revolt to a certain extent, as various starving and discontented peoples rose up to slay their overlords. Other theories place the Sea Peoples as coming from the western Mediterranean, or the lands to the north of Greece and Asia Minor. There may have even been a conglomeration of all of these people. Unlike his neighbours, Ramesses had had years to prepare, and he was able to meet the Sea Peoples in open battle on the Nile, and prevent a massive seaborne invasion from landing. The fighting was brutal, but in its aftermath the invaders left for good. However, the Egyptian world would never be the same again. Whereas previously, Egyptian influence in diplomatic relations stretched from Afghanistan to Greece, the world system of the Late Bronze Age collapsed to such an extent that there were very few neighbours left to correspond with. Despite the apparent normality purported on inscriptions and carvings, Ramesses lived out the rest of his long reign in constant fear of further encroachment by hostile enemies. Egypt was in decline, and this time it would not recover. Possibly one of the greatest blows was a deficit of tin, an integral part of the bronze-making process, which had been an integral part of warfare and power for hundreds of years, and could only be found in remote places such as Cornwall, southern Turkey and Afghanistan, routes which now were mostly blocked by hostile enemies. Ramesses died in 1155, apparently killed by members of his own family in an attempted coup. In the aftermath of his reign came several centuries of decline in Egypt, and chaos in the rest of the eastern Mediterranean, often known as the First Dark Age. The period represents the first break in a continuous line of culture dating back from the very first cities of Samaria thousands of years before. Gone were the elite chariot archer corps of armies which had dominated the Bronze Age, and also to a certain extent was gone the divine power of kings and elites, replaced by masses of infantry and opportunistic common people. In Greece and in places within Asia Minor, writing was forgotten for hundreds of years, and the Mycenaean culture, which had disappeared, was remembered in half-truths and legends such as Homer's Odyssey. The civilizations that arose from the ashes of the Late Bronze Age collapse would go on to dominate the next period of history. As the years went by, Egypt still lingered on, keeping intact the Late Bronze Age elite power system which had used chariots in warfare and placed all emphasis on the power of the king. Within a few hundred years, Egypt was conquered by a new power, the Assyrians, and after them, the Persians. Whilst Egypt was still arguably a Bronze Age power, a new age had dawned, an age of iron.